Good day, everyone. My name is Olawale Mutiati today. My pleasure to welcome you to the class SCD 221, which is Biology for Integrated Science 2. In our last lesson, we treated plants' structure and function. We were able to identify parts of the plants and their functions. But this week, we want to classify our plants into different groups. That brings us to our today's topic, which is plants classification. You are going to enjoy every part of this lesson. Please don't miss the class. Thank you.
In our class SCD 221 Biology for Integrated Science 2, today we are going to treat plants classification. And today's date is 5th of October 2020. Objectives of our lesson are to explain the meaning of classification. The second one is to list the criteria used to classify plants. And the third one is to differentiate between Chalophyta and Embryophyta. Now, what is classification? Classification simply means the grouping of organisms on the basis of their common features. The science of classification is known as taxonomy. Taxonomy simply deals with identification and naming of organisms. Now, let's look at the criteria used to classify and name organisms. External features of organisms can be used to name organisms into groups. Internal features of organisms can also be used to name and classify organisms into groups. Evolutionary records is used as well to name and classify organisms into the groups. Evidences from physiology, from embryology, and anatomy can also be used to classify our organisms into different groups. Now, placing organisms into groups is called systematics. Binomial system of nomenclature is used to name an organism. The system, that is binomial system of nomenclature, was devised by a Swedish naturalist called Linnaeus. In this system, each organism is given two names: generic and specific names. Now let's look at some examples. Maize. Our maize is called Z-maize. Another example is mango, which is Mangifera indica. Now let's look at some of the crops, the names given to them. Rice. Our rice is called Oryza sativa. Oats. Oats is called Avena sativa. Soybean is named Glycine max. Cowpea as well is called Vigna sinensis. Coconut is named Cocos nucifera, while the sunflower is called Elianthus enus. I'm going to stop at that. We can get more and more of the names of these crops as we proceed in the lesson. Now, let's look at plant kingdom. In the plant kingdom, which is also referred to as Kingdom Plantae, we'll see that our plants are majorly divided into two classes. One is Talophyta and the second one is Embryophyta. Talophyta are the plants that have undifferentiated tissues. An example of this plant is Pyrogera, Volvox, and Chlamydomonas. They don't have differentiated tissues. Embryophyta is another class of plants. They are plants with differentiated tissues. And the example of these plants are Bryophyta, Pteridophyta, seed plant. Now let's see the differences between the Talophyta and Embryophyta that makes us to classify them into different groups. In Talophyta, you find out that they are primitive from evolutionary trend. Like you said the other time, example of them is Pyrogera, Volvox, Chlamydomonas, those plants that have no differentiated tissues. And why the Embryophyta are more advanced plants. And the example of this is our seed plants. Now, Talophyta, they are plants with undifferentiated tissue, like I said the other time. And undifferentiated tissue are called thallus. Embryophyta have tissue that are differentiated into simple roots, stems, and leaves. Now, Talophyta plants, they are unicellular reproductive structure. They possess unicellular reproductive structure. Why Embryophyta? Their reproductive structure is multicellular. Can you see the difference? Talophyta unicellular, Embryophyta multicellular. Now, another difference between them is that Talophytes, their zygotes do not develop into embryo within the female reproductive organs. While in Embryophyta, embryos start development within the female reproductive organs. That's another difference between Talophyta and Embryophyta. Now, let's recap. In our lesson, we found out that the scientific way of classifying living organisms is known as taxonomy. And the criteria for classification are external features, internal features, physiological, anatomical, embryological evidences, and as well as evolutionary trends. These are the things we look at as the criteria to classify our living things. Then, the generic and specific names of our plants. Majorly, we look at the example as maize, which is known as Z maize. Mango is also called Mangifera indica. Do you remember what we called our rice? Which is Oryza sativa. Now, let's evaluate ourselves. We can explain the meaning of classification Then the next one should be able to list the criteria used to classify plants. I hope we can all do that. Then you should be able to mention general and specific names of some plants. Do you still remember the examples of plants? Some crops we mentioned during the lesson, their generic and specific names. Now, assignment time. We are going to list 10 generic and specific names of any plant apart from the ones treated during the class. At least you have your notes with you. You know the ones we have already listed during the lesson. So you write 10 other ones apart from those we have listed. Thanks for listening. My name once again is Olawale Mutiati. My email address is written below, which is olawale@noun.edu.ng. Bye.